Welcome back to the channel. When you think about the golden age of hip-hop, it is impossible not to hear the echo of one night in March 1997, the night the music stopped for Christopher Wallace, better known as the Notorious B.I.G, or simply Biggie Smalls. His death did not just end a career, it froze a movement in time. Decades later, the question still hangs in the air: who killed Biggie, and why has no one been held accountable? Biggie's murder has become one of America's most enduring, unsolved cases. On March 9, 1997, he left a Vibe magazine party in Los Angeles, riding in a dark Chevy Suburban. A few blocks from the Peterson Automotive Museum, a black Impala pulled alongside, and 4 shots cut through the night. He was 24. Just like that, one of the greatest voices of the East Coast rap scene was gone, and the rivalry that had defined a generation suddenly felt like it had claimed its final victim. From the start, investigators were chasing ghosts. Theories piled up faster than facts: gang retaliation, music industry politics, revenge for Tupac Shakur's death months earlier. The name most often whispered, Suge Knight, head of Death Row Records, became almost a reflexive answer. Detectives and journalists pointed to Wardell Puccifaus, a gang member allegedly tied to Knight, as the possible shooter. But Faust himself was killed in 2003, taking whatever truth he held with him. Meanwhile, the official investigation stumbled. Internal LAPD corruption scandals tangled the case even more. Rumors spread that some officers moonlighted for death row. Biggie's family fought back through civil suits, arguing that the city had buried the truth to protect its own. None of it led to a conviction. Each new lead circled back to the same wall of silence. Time has not softened the fascination or the suspicion. In early 2025, a former bodyguard for Sean Diddy Combs reignited controversy by claiming Diddy might have known about the hit. The comment stirred headlines, but offered no solid proof. Around the same time, Biggie's mother, Valletta Wallace, passed away. Still carrying the weight of unanswered questions she would pursued for nearly 3 decades. And yet Biggie's presence has not faded. His lyrics still pulse through clubs, documentaries, and murals from Brooklyn to L.A. The Library of Congress even enshrined his album Ready to Die as part of the National Recording Registry, a quiet acknowledgement that the man the justice system forgot still defines an era. So we begin today's story not with closure, but with absence. The unsolved death of a legend, and the uneasy peace that follows when truth stays just out of reach. March 9, 1997 began like any other night in Los Angeles, at least on the surface. Biggie Smalls had been in town for weeks, promoting his second album, Life After Death. That night, he attended a party hosted by Vibe magazine and Quest Records at the Peterson Automotive Museum, a glamorous industry event filled with artists, producers, and record executives. Security was tight, but tension was in the air. The East Coast-West Coast rivalry, fueled by months of hostility and the still fresh death of Tupac Shakur, hovered over the celebration like a shadow. Shortly after midnight, Biggie left the venue with his entourage. He climbed into the front passenger seat of a dark green GMC Suburban, followed by 3 other vehicles carrying his friends and bodyguards. The streets of Los Angeles were quiet, but the night would turn violent within minutes. As the convoy stopped at a red light on Wilshire Boulevard, a black Chevrolet Impala SS pulled up beside Biggie's SUV. The driver, a man in a dark suit and bow tie, rolled down his window, lifted a 9mm pistol, and fired 4 quick shots. Witnesses later said the attack felt almost professional, planned rather than spontaneous. Biggie was hit 4 times. The fatal bullet entered through his right hip, tearing upward through his heart. The shooter sped off into the night without a word. At Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, doctors tried to save him for 30 minutes before pronouncing him dead at 1:15 a.m. He was just 24. News spread instantly. Radio DJs broke down. On air, fans gathered outside the hospital, and the hip-hop world froze in disbelief. For many, the timing felt too cruel to be coincidence. Tupac had been murdered in Las Vegas only 6 months earlier, also in a drive-by, also unsolved. Biggie's death seemed to confirm what everyone feared, that the music war between coasts had spilled irreversibly into real life. In the following days, Los Angeles police flooded the area with investigators, but clues were thin. The shooter's car vanished without a trace. No fingerprints, no solid eyewitness who could identify the man behind the gun. The murder weapon was never recovered. Even with multiple vehicles in Biggie's convoy and dozens of party guests nearby, silence fell over the investigation almost immediately. The moment marked not only the end of a rising artist's life, but the death of an era, the point where success, fame, and violence blurred beyond separation. What had once been music's fiercest rivalry had now taken on the weight of tragedy. In the years that followed Biggie's death, one explanation kept resurfacing: revenge. The murder of Tupac Shakur in September 1996 had left the rap world divided, and many believed Biggie's killing was retaliation. Both men had once been friends, but by the mid-1990s, their friendship had curdled into hostility, fueled by media narratives and record label politics. Tupac was tied to Death Row Records and Suge Knight in Los Angeles. Biggie was the face of Sean Diddy Combs' Bad Boy Records in New York. When Tupac was shot in Las Vegas, fingers pointed east. 6 months later, Biggie was dead in almost identical circumstances: a drive-by, a black car, and silence. LAPD detectives, former gang members, and even retired FBI agents have all leaned toward the same story: that Suge Knight, furious over Tupac's death and Bad Boy's success, ordered a hit on Biggie. The plan, they say, ran through the Blood Street Gang, specifically a man named Wardell Puccifaus, a known associate of Death Row Records. He allegedly carried out the shooting for money and loyalty. But like so many characters in this story, Faust did not live long enough to answer questions. He was shot dead in 2003. Other theories swirl around, each as complicated as the industry itself. At some point, to rogue police officers moonlighting for Death Row, suggesting that elements inside the LAPD may have helped plan or cover up the crime. Others claim the killings of Tupac and Biggie were orchestrated by competing record executives, each trying to protect their empires as the rap world exploded into mainstream fame and money. The deeper investigators dig, the murkier the truth becomes. Witnesses retract statements, files go missing, and leads evaporate under the weight of time and fear. Even those close to the case admit the truth might already be buried. Not because no one knows it, but because too many people do. Still, the theory linking Death Row to Biggie's death remains the backbone of most investigations. It ties together motive, means, and the tragic symmetry of two artists caught between loyalty and survival. In that sense, the murder was not just about revenge. It was about control of music, of power, of the story itself. The name that surfaces most often when the question turns to who pulled the trigger is Wardell Puccifaus. In gang circles, he was known as a reliable enforcer, a member of the mob Piru Bloods, and a man who did not hesitate to do favors for Suge Knight. Fowles' reputation for loyalty to Death Row Records made him both trusted and expendable. According to several former associates, Suge Knight allegedly ordered the hit from prison, using intermediaries who reached out to Fowles. The deal, they say, promised money around $13,000 and the satisfaction of avenging Tupac's death. Fowles supposedly drove the black Chevy Impala used in the shooting, dressed formally to blend in with post-party traffic near the museum. No physical evidence ever tied him to the murder. The LAPD's lead detective at the time, Russell Poole, built much of the case on gang testimony, tracing connections between death row, corrupt police officers, and organized retaliation within the Bloods. But when Fowles was murdered in 2003 while riding his motorcycle in Compton, the investigation lost its most direct suspect, and with him, any realistic chance of trial. Years later, former LAPD detective Greg Kading revisited the case. In his book and subsequent documentary, he argued that Fowles was the shooter hired at Knight's request. Kading's narrative gave the story shape, but not closure. Without new forensic evidence or a living witness, the theory remains officially unproven, a story pieced together from statements, hearsay, and unrecorded confessions. Even so, the idea of Fowles as the gunman fits the tragic logic of the 1990 seconds rap scene, one life avenging another, both swallowed by the same feud. It is a theory that refuses to die, not because it is airtight, but because it feels painfully plausible. In early 2025, the old wounds reopened when new claims surfaced, this time pointing toward Sean Diddy Combs, Biggie's mentor, and the man who helped shape his rise to fame. A former bodyguard who once worked for Diddy went public, suggesting that the music mogul might have known something about the plot that ended Biggie's life. The remark set off a fresh wave of speculation across news outlets and social media. No evidence accompanied the accusation. It was vague, almost teasing, but powerful enough to reignite suspicion. For years, conspiracy theorists have floated the idea that the feud between East Coast and West Coast labels was less about music than about business control of artists, contracts, and image. In that world, loyalty could be both an asset and a weapon. Diddy, for his part, has consistently denied any connection to Biggie's death. In interviews, he describes losing Biggie as the darkest day of my life, calling him family. Still, the rumor lingers because it sits at the crossroads of fame, money, and betrayal, the same forces that define the 1990 seconds hip-hop industry. The timing of the renewed allegations was brutal. They came just as the culture seemed ready to celebrate Biggie's legacy, not rehash his death. Documentaries, retrospectives, and even honors from the National Recording Registry had reframed him as an artist who transcended the violence around him. Yet the shadow of the unsolved case refused to fade. Every few years, someone steps forward with a story, a rumor, or a confession that promises to blow the case wide open. Every time, it fades again into uncertainty. But these moments show how raw the loss still feels, and how fragile the line is between remembrance and suspicion. In a way, the persistence of Diddy's name in these theories says as much about the culture of fame as it does about the case itself. When justice stalls, people turn to storytelling to fill the silence. And in the story of Biggie Smalls, everyone seems to have a role to play, except the one voice that mattered most. The Los Angeles Police Department launched multiple investigations into Biggie's murder, but each one seemed to collapse under its own weight. The first inquiry, in 1997, was ambitious but fractured. Detectives gathered witness statements and gang intelligence, yet internal politics quickly got in the way. The case's lead investigator, Russell Poole, believed from early on that the killing was not random. It was the product of a deeper web connecting death row records, the Bloods, and possibly corrupt LAPD officers. Poole's suspicions pointed toward a few specific officers who, he claimed, were moonlighting for Suge Knight's label as private security. His theory suggested that one of these officers could have coordinated the ambush or at least shielded those responsible afterward. But when Poole presented his findings, he was told to back off. The department reportedly feared a public scandal involving its own men. Poole later resigned in frustration, convinced the truth had been buried to protect reputations. Years later, in 2006, another team reopened the case, promising a fresh look. They revisited leads, re-interviewed witnesses, and followed the trail left by Poole. This new effort gained momentum under Detective Greg Kading, who built a parallel theory, aligning with Poole's, but supported by different witnesses. Kading's team even compiled an internal report claiming Suge Knight ordered the hit and that Wardell Poochie Faust executed it. But when Kading's findings leaked, the case was once again shut down, this time by the U.S. Attorney's Office, which declined to prosecute due to insufficient, admissible evidence. The public saw it as another failure, but for detectives inside the department, it felt like running into a locked door they would already kicked before. Too much time had passed. Too many witnesses were dead, missing, or unwilling to talk. Files went missing. Sources contradicted each other, and what remained was a tangle of paperwork and politics. The LAPD still classifies Biggie's murder as an open and active investigation, though few believe progress is being made. In reality, it is a file that gathers dust on a shelf, a reminder that sometimes justice is not lost because no one cares, but because too many people once did, all in different directions. When the criminal investigation went nowhere, Biggie's family turned to the courts. In 2002, his mother, Voletta Wallace, along with his widow, Faith Evans, and their children, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles. The claim was bold. They alleged that corrupt LAPD officers had played a role in Biggie's killing, and that the department had covered it up to protect its own. Their case leaned heavily on the work of Russell Poole, the detective who had quit in frustration years earlier. Poole's findings suggested that certain officers had been affiliated with death row records and may have helped plan or conceal the ambush. The Wallace family argued that the LAPD knew this and chose silence over accountability. The lawsuit briefly looked promising. Federal Judge Florence Marie Cooper ordered the city to hand over internal LAPD files, and some of what surfaced seemed to validate Poole's suspicions. But then, the case unraveled. The city argued that there was no direct evidence linking police officers to the shooting, and in 2005, the trial was declared a mistrial after key evidence was mishandled. A later version of the lawsuit was dismissed altogether in 2010. Despite losing in court, the Wallaces achieved something quieter but lasting: public scrutiny. The lawsuits forced the LAPD's hidden conflicts into the open and made clear that the department's credibility was as much on trial as any suspect could have been. Voletta Wallace never stopped pressing for justice. In interviews, she spoke with the steadiness of someone who'd learned to live with heartbreak, but not with silence. "They know who killed my son," she once said, "and they choose to do nothing." Each legal defeat reinforced the sense that the system was not built to handle cases like this, where truth sits at the crossroads of celebrity, power, and corruption. For Biggie's family, the courtroom may not have given closure, but it kept the story alive, making sure the world remembered that behind the legend was still a mother waiting for an answer. Over the decades, pieces of the puzzle have surfaced enough to paint outlines, never a full picture. Journalists, retired detectives, and even former gang members have all stepped forward, claiming to know who killed Biggie Smalls. What is striking is not the shortage of stories. It is how many of them overlap, just shy of proof. Greg Kading's investigation, later detailed in Murder Rap, remains one of the most widely cited accounts. He claimed that Suge Knight ordered Biggie's death while in jail, using intermediaries in the Bloods gang. The alleged shooter, Wardell Poochie Faust, matched the vehicle description, the payment trail, and the timing. The LAPD's internal task force reportedly found this explanation the most consistent with existing evidence, but not solid enough for a courtroom. Hearsay, uncorroborated testimony, and a lack of physical proof made it impossible to secure charges. Journalists such as Randall Sullivan and filmmakers like Nick Broomfield added fuel to the fire, with documentaries and books exposing potential cover-ups and political pressure within the LAPD. Their work blurred the line between investigation and cultural obsession. Each new revelation, a missing report, a retracted statement, a suspiciously quiet witness, seemed to confirm what people already felt. The truth was being protected by someone powerful. The problem was not the absence of evidence, but the inability to prove ownership of it. Bullets, vehicles, payments, and names existed in fragments, never in full alignment. Detectives spoke of informants who vanished, files that could not be located, and tips that led nowhere. It was as if the investigation had been designed to self-destruct. Even within law enforcement, disagreement reigned. Some officers insisted the motive was purely gang-related, an act of street-level revenge dressed up as industry warfare. Others believed it was corporate sabotage, a hit arranged to cripple Bad Boy Records. None could present a version airtight enough to withstand cross-examination. As a result, the story of Biggie's murder became something larger than a police file. It turned into folklore. People no longer asked who did it, so much as why will no one say. That question, in the end, might be what keeps the case alive long after everyone involved is gone. Biggie's death did not just silence a rapper. It reshaped an entire culture. The murder marked the end of the 1,990 seconds hip-hop golden era. A time when artistry, rivalry, and authenticity were inseparable. When Biggie died, it felt as though the voice of Brooklyn itself had been cut short mid-verse. The shock rippled far beyond the music scene. News anchors, politicians, and even moral commentators weighed in, treating his killing as both a tragedy and a warning about how fame and violence had become entangled. The East Coast-West Coast feud, once fueled by bravado and lyrics, suddenly looked like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Radio stations stopped playing diss tracks for a while. Artists publicly called for peace. Snoop Dogg, who had once been at the center of the storm, appeared on stage with Diddy months later, a symbolic attempt to bury the rivalry that had killed two of rap's biggest names. Meanwhile, Biggie's posthumous album, Life After Death, dropped just weeks after his murder. The timing was haunting. Songs like You Are Nobody Till Somebody Kills You sounded less like art and more like foreshadowing. The album debuted at #1, selling millions and cementing his place as one of the greatest lyricists in hip-hop history. But the celebration was bittersweet. Success carried the echo of loss. The cultural response did not fade with time. Murals of Biggie began appearing across New York, in Bed, Stewie, in Queens, in the Bronx, each one turning grief into memory. Every generation since has rediscovered him, either through documentaries, verses sampled by new artists, or the stories told by those who knew him. Even outside music, Biggie's death became shorthand for something bigger, the cost of truth in a world ruled by image. The feud that had once been entertainment was now seen as cautionary, a reminder that power, art, and ego can collide in ways no one walks away from. To this day, Every tribute concert, every documentary, every verse that mentions his name carries the same undertone that justice never came, but his voice still echoes louder than the silence that followed. More than a quarter century later, the Biggie Smalls case still refuses to fade into the background. In 2024 and 2025, several moments brought it back into public view, not through police breakthroughs, but through memory and media. The most personal shift came in early 2025, when Voletta Wallace, Biggie's mother, passed away at 72. For decades, she had been the steady center of her son's legacy, the woman who refused to let his death be forgotten. Her passing marked the end of an era in its own right, leaving fans to wonder who would continue her fight for answers. Even in her later interviews, she remained measured but unshakable. "I will never stop asking." They know now that determination rests with Biggie's estate and those who protect his name. At the same time, new documentaries and podcasts reignited discussion. Streaming platforms revisited the East Coast-West Coast rivalry with fresh interviews from former LAPD officers, journalists, and hip-hop insiders. Most of these projects did not claim to solve the case. Instead, they traced how corruption, race, and fame shaped the investigation's failure. One of them even featured unseen LAPD files that seemed to validate the old Suge Knight Poochie connection, though the material was not enough to reopen prosecution. Culturally, Biggie's influence remains more visible than ever. In 2024, his album Ready to Die was added to the National Recording Registry, recognizing its historical importance in American music. Younger artists continue to sample his flow, and every anniversary brings a wave of tributes across social media, proof that his voice still defines a generation that came after him. And then there are the rumors, the resurfacing of old names, claims of new witnesses, and supposed confessions posted online. Each time, headlines flare for a week, and then the case drifts back into the quiet. The real investigation, the one behind closed doors, seems permanently stuck between memory and bureaucracy. Still, there is a sense that the truth exists somewhere, suspended in the spaces between stories. Every fresh detail, every quote, every interview does not bring closure, but it keeps the wound from closing completely. And maybe that is why, all these years later, people still return to it. Because as long as the mystery lives, Biggie does too. Even without justice, Biggie's name has only grown larger with time. His estate, managed carefully by his family and representatives, has turned remembrance into responsibility. Each project, whether a documentary, a remix, or a fashion collaboration, walks a fine line between tribute and protection. The aim has always been to preserve who Christopher Wallace was, not just the myth of the Notorious B.I.G. In recent years, that legacy has deepened rather than faded. His albums continue to chart decades after their release. Ready to Die and Life After Death have been studied in university music courses, quoted in literature, and even archived by the Library of Congress. To have his work recognized as part of the National Recording Registry in 2024 placed him alongside the giants of American culture, Louis Armstrong, Bob Dylan, and Aretha Franklin, proof that his storytelling transcended the world that took his life. His image, too, has become symbolic. The murals in Brooklyn are no longer acts of mourning, but of permanence. A local saint in a Coogie sweater and crown. Schools and community centers host events in his name, and every May 21st, fans mark what would have been his birthday with vigils, DJ sets, and food drives. His mother once said she wanted her son remembered, not for how he died, but for how he lived. That wish, slowly, is being honored. the estate continues to navigate offers from Hollywood and the music industry, turning down projects that sensationalize his death while supporting those that explore his craft. The goal is not to rewrite his story, but to keep it human, to remind people that behind the legend was a man who wrote about fear, struggle, and ambition with unmatched honesty. Biggie's influence threads through generations of artists who came after him: Jay-Z, Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, all citing his ability to turn everyday life into art. Even younger fans who were not alive when he died speak of him with reverence, as if his words have always been part of hip-hop's bloodstream. His voice, warm and deliberate, remains what it always was: a mirror held up to ambition and vulnerability. The legal system failed him, but time has not. In the space where justice faltered, legacy has taken root, steady, untouchable, and still speaking. As of 2025, the murder of the Notorious B.I.G. remains officially unsolved. No arrests, no indictments, no confession that survives scrutiny. The case file still sits open at the Los Angeles Police Department, but open has become more a formality than a promise. Detectives have come and gone. Some retired, some died, and the few who still speak about the case admit that the trail is cold. What remains are fragments, a theory here, a witness there, and an ocean of speculation. The main players who might have held answers are either dead, imprisoned, or unwilling to talk. Suge Knight serves time for an unrelated killing. Wardell Poochie Fowles was murdered 2 decades ago. Russell Poole, the detective who risked his career pursuing the truth, died in 2015 after years of pushing his findings into the void. Every few years a headline appears: new lead in Biggie case. Former detective claims breakthrough, and for a brief moment, the world listens again. But those moments fade just as quickly, replaced by the quiet acceptance that justice may never come. The story has become a loop, evidence re-examined, theories revived, the same names resurfacing like echoes. And yet, the mystery has never gone stale. It lives on, because it represents something bigger than one man's death. It is the story of a culture caught between art and survival, of a system that could not keep up with the power of the world it was policing. Biggie's murder, like Tupac's before it, stands as a reminder that fame can amplify both voice and vulnerability. In the end, what is left is not resolution, but resonance. His lyrics, recorded in tiny New York studios, still reach around the world. Young rappers quote him without irony. Fans still gather in bed, Stewie every March, lighting candles beneath murals that have outlasted most of the people who painted them. Justice has not come, but memory has endured, and maybe that is its own kind of verdict. The silence of the courts never erased his voice. It only made it echo longer. The murder of the Notorious B.I.G. is more than a cold case. It is a mirror reflecting the collision of fame, ambition, and failure inside a system that could not carry the weight of truth. Decades later, what endures is not just the crime, but the contradictions around it. A brilliant artist whose life told the story of struggle and success, silenced by the very forces he sang about. Every retelling of his death circles back to the same haunting contrast: how someone so full of life could vanish in seconds, and how a nation obsessed with celebrity could let the mystery go unanswered. But maybe that is what gives the story its power. It forces us to confront the uneasy truth that talent does not protect anyone, and justice is not guaranteed even for legends. Biggie's voice remains everywhere, in street murals, in sampled verses, in the rhythm of every rapper chasing honesty over fame. His story has slipped beyond tragedy into legacy, not because the case is solved, but because his words outlived the silence that tried to bury them. Thank you for watching and remembering with us tonight. If stories like this make you stop and think about how history and art intertwine, do not forget to stay with the channel. More untold stories, more unanswered questions, more echoes from the past still waiting to be heard.